when people talk about, well, if he revalued the gold on the balance sheet, it would only produce, 800 billion into the Treasury General account. Well, you could do a lot with 800 billion as far as reducing long-term issuance and things like that, but that's at current prices. What is it going to be July 4th, 2026? Even if it goes up just 75%, that's ignoring the fact that this is turning into a parabolic move. So anybody that sits back and tells you they think they know what the gold price is going to be a year plus from now is just clickbait, pure and simple.
This is Little by Little with Andy Schechtman.
All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Little by Little. I am very psyched to have with me Matt Riley. Matt is someone who I got to know a bit last year, and very, very impressed with, Matt, your work, and I'm very psyched to have you here. I'm also very happy to hear that you're not just running Eagle Forge Bullion anymore as a wholesaler. You also haven't recently accepted a job with Andrew McGuire, my good buddy, and his company that he works with, Kinesis. You are a product designer and vault manager. I'm very happy for you. They're wonderful people and a great product. So welcome in, Matt. Thanks for being here today, bud. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for the intro. And the whole Kinesis operation is a great thing to be affiliated with. I was really excited to get to work with them because we all agree on a common purpose, right? Sound money. So it's great to be here to talk with you about exactly that, sound money and, current economic.
Yeah, man. I've been following BRICS for a while, but your take on mBridge and the unit was honestly the best I've ever heard. We were introduced by Chris Marcus, and Chris just seems to always uncover great people or uncover things that, from an investigative journalist standpoint, that are very hard to rival. It's interesting. The only two times I ever heard Bart Chilton say the things he did was with Chris and then with Andrew McGuire, two people who you're associated with, two great people in this industry. I have to ask you a question because I spent a lot of time researching BRICS back over the last 5 years. How did you come across? Well, let me take a step back. Let's get people to know you a little bit better. Before I go there, tell me a little bit about yourself. What got you into the precious metals space? What inspired you to create Eagle Forge Bullion? And then we'll get into the BRICS, because that's really something that I'm curious about. I'm sure the people listening to this are too. So what got you into the precious metals space, and maybe before that, a little bit about yourself?
So I guess about myself. Texas born and raised, and spent 21 years in the Navy. I retired about a year ago.
Thank you for your service.
You're more welcome. But that background, my parents ran a business and metalworking and things like that. So the metal artistry side of it, it's always been interesting. But in 2020, I could see what was coming with the virus going on in China. So Boston Gold and Silver, and made good friends with a guy named Dave Schroeder in Omaha, Nebraska, I was buying stuff from. And during 2020, he couldn't source any products. So he said he's got all these 1,000-ounce bars, and he's like, if I could just get them made at a shot, I could have people that could produce bars. So I think he was kind of daring me a little bit. So I said, fine, I'll buy one from you and figure out how to melt it. So I did that and figured out, melting it with torches in my garage. And so I started melting down 1,000-ounce bars for him during 2020 so that he could get somebody else to make them. And that got me interested in making it in the future. So we moved back down to Texas for our last move in the military. And I just set up to be able to do that, to be able to take the process all the way through to making bars. Because one, it's sound money, and two, it's just a physical activity. I enjoy that aspect of it. As far as the financial side, I was in Intel my entire career. Intel enlisted for 10 years and then officer for about 10 or 11 years. And so I've got that analytical mindset, and I got an economics degree at Texas A&M, kind of in the middle of the career there. And that's kind of the education and background that, sparked my curiosity in what's going on. In 2020, 2021, you could see that China was preparing, right? So I started digging into what the BIS was doing, and they published a lot about mBridge. Start looking at the background of it, and you just start pulling strings, right? Find any data source you can, use something other than Google, and just start digging into it.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, your take on mBridge in the unit was the best I'd ever heard, and I've cited a lot of the information that you turned me on to. I think you told me about Russian search engines and other ways of finding information, which have assisted me quite a bit. I thank you for that. So again, I guess, what is it? Invention is the mother of necessity. You figured out how to melt 1,000-ounce bars with a torch, which is crazy to think of, and your curiosity. What's that?
I'll send you videos.
Yeah, I mean, that's just kind of nuts, but hey, you figured out how to do it, and led you to start a successful wholesale business, EF Bullion. And your curiosity led you down a rabbit hole that I find to be extraordinary, where it led you, because I was spending hours a day, every day, researching and reading, and you came across stuff that I found to be more enlightening than anything I had read. So I thank you for that. Let's talk about the BRICS for a moment, because I think there are very few people that are qualified to speak about it the way that you are. And my question would be, and this is a question that I think maybe you've heard along the way. I certainly have, from friends and acquaintances who say, my question is, how would you respond to someone who says, I don't care what BRICS does, I live in the United States and the dollar isn't going anywhere? What are these people missing in the big picture?
In the big picture, they're missing the link between the value of their dollar and the value of U.S. bonds, I think is, Luke Groman and other analysts have noted, there's a big difference between the currency that you use and the asset that backs it. And the U.S. Treasury has backed the U.S. dollar for a long time. So the dollar's not going anywhere. The dollar's not collapsing per se. It's going to be around for a long time. But the purchasing power of it, and especially the purchasing power of U.S. government bonds, is going to go down. Now, that's a lot of people will say, well, it's better than the yuan, or it's better than the ruble, or it's better than the euro, and better than this and that. Like, okay, that's fine. But as the neutral reserve asset transitions to gold, that is the true measure of the purchasing power of a currency. When net trade imbalances are settled much more quickly via China's interbank payment system, SIPS, or the new name for mBridge, and different systems like that, there's less imbalances that are going to be netted out, and that's going to be netted in gold. So the actual FX crosses matter less in a long-term sense, because those deals are settled instantaneously, and instead of storing value in government bonds, it's stored in gold. So I think people miss the dollar is linked to treasuries. So when a treasury value gets cut in half, or by 40% from 2020, and it goes from a sub 1% coupon to, at some points, over 5%, now hovering around 4.4. That's a massive destruction in the backing and buying power of the U.S. dollar.
Right, and that makes good sense. And gold has doubled the performance of the 10-year Treasury over the past 25 years. Most people don't understand that, but last year the Treasury was up 4% or just over, and gold's up 40%. So I think you're seeing, to your point, countries choose gold as that neutral reserve asset rather than the U.S. Treasury. I agree completely, and that is what people are missing. And I think it's hard for them to to see that the mainstream doesn't do much at all about talking about these kinds of very important things.
I would challenge anyone that looks at a statement about the dollar is strong or it's performing well versus other currencies to look at the background data that supports it. And almost every time, it comes back to some sort of Western mainstream media article or analytical process using SWIFT data. Well, if nations are de-dollarizing in a sense of changing the denomination of their transactions and using different systems to settle those transactions, you're not going to see that happening in data on SWIFT. So when they say, well, the dollar is the highest percentage of, international settlements that it's been in, since 2013 or all time or something like that, they're looking at SWIFT data only compared to the euro and the yuan's participation in SWIFT. And that's it. It can't measure data that it doesn't have. So always look at that background assumption, the data that supports it, and you'll see real quick. So any argument that says the dollar is strong or is surging that relies on SWIFT data is just automatically void in my mind.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I'm going to get to that in a moment. But I want to get your take. I'm going to read something to you and I want your opinion, because what I'm about to read you, to me, amounts to espionage. It amounts to coordinated espionage. But I want to get your take on it, because this kind of threw a wrench in everything. And I think this is why, to your point, BRICS have been very quiet about their goings on. I mean, yeah, there was an article just the other day that said 45 countries have applied to BRICS, formerly Vietnam, the last one. Indonesia became a full member. But we haven't heard a lot like we used to. And I want to read this to you and get your take on it. And this is where you and I last left off before this happened. The mBridge was now operational. The unit, we heard from Dilma Rousseff, the former president of Brazil and the head of the New Development Bank, that they had agreed to it in principle. You're the one who really sparked my interest in the unit, and I thank you for that. I don't think it's gone away, but I want to get your opinion on this. So the Bank of International Settlements officially exited Project mBridge in October 2024. The decision came after 4 years of collaboration with the central banks from China, Hong Kong, Thailand, and the UAE, and later Saudi Arabia. BIS General Manager Augustin Carstens clarified that mBridge was not intended to serve as a conduit for sanction evasion and reiterated the BIS's commitment to compliance with the international regulations. It's as if he just realized after 4 years that Russia was the R in BRICS. What's your take on that?
So I had that article pulled up to discuss with you already, actually. Because it's a fascinating time frame that in October of 24, right? Augustin Carstens is at an IMF meeting in Washington, and I'll read something out of that for you. So Augustin Carstens, BIS general manager, whose term ends in June, said on Saturday in an event at the G30 in U.S. Capitol, we cannot directly support any project for the BRICS because we cannot operate with countries that are subject to sanctions. I want to be very clear about that. And he also goes on to say BIS is debating ending the project altogether. So I believe that was October 24th or 25th. And then less than a week later, on the 30th and 31st, he says what you just quoted. Where was it? Yeah, we cannot directly support any project for BRICS because we cannot operate in countries that are subject to sanctions. Excuse me. I'm sorry. What you just quoted, he said essentially, once he was out of America and back in Europe, he comes back and says, mBridge is not designed for sanctions evasion. We are still a participant. It has just matured and it no longer needs our assistance. So that is why we are probably going to exit. So I think sometime between the 24th and the 30th, after saying what he said at the IMF, Carstens got talked to by somebody from China to say, you need to clarify this and you need to straighten that out, because you can't be calling us money launderers effectively, because this is the system that they're transitioning to and they're not going to tolerate it. Well, BIS being mostly associated with and used by the IMF system had to pull out of mBridge. It's like, why would a company build a product and then say, you know what, this is good, it's great, we built it as much as we can, we're just going to leave it alone now, we're going to
For 4 years. Yeah, it's crazy. That's why I say it's like espionage.
Yeah, it is. So Carson's was under pressure in Washington to trash mBridge and make it look like a money laundering project or a sanctions evasion project, which it can be used in sanctions evasion, I guess you want to say, avoidance, but that's not its purpose. And he clarified that once he was out of America, and I think in the intervening time was spoken to or pressured by the other side of the coin in China to clarify that mBridge is not designed for money laundering and sanctions evasion.
So it seems to me, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, that this technology has quietly morphed somewhere else, and de-dollarization is real. It's not just a theory. I'm going to get your opinion on this as well. This is just an article I just read last week. The People's Bank of China has announced that its digital RMB cross-border settlement system is now fully connected to 10 ASEAN countries. Those are the countries in Southeast Asia and 6 Middle Eastern nations. This development enables approximately 38% of global trade to bypass the traditional SWIFT system, which is predominantly used for transactions in the United States, in the US dollars, rather, allowing these trades to be settled directly in digital RMB. And it goes on to say, in practical terms, China's digital currency bridge, not mBridge, but they call it the digital currency bridge, seems to me the same technology, has significantly reduced cross-border payment processing times from the typical 3 to 5 days associated with SWIFT to approximately 7 seconds, and achieving real-time settlement with a 98% reduction in handling fees.
That's mBridge.
That's mBridge. And so this is something they're continuing to work on. Where is the unit in all of this? Is that something that is just tabled for now, or do you see that reemerging on this platform?
It will be reemerged through that platform. And it's what unit is an FX fixing mechanism for how you're going to index the Saudi Rial and the yuan and the ruble and all those different currencies. That FX peg is going to be via something, whether it's called unit, just like this digital currency bridge that is now operating from China to many other nations, and even bilaterally between nations not including China. That is the same platform that was mBridge. They just renamed it. Whether it's called unit or not, a gold index to those currencies is so that they can reference to a neutral reserve asset for net settlement is going to be included. It already is included in the platform, but so the technology is there within the bridge, but they don't want to publicly talk about that yet because they have to get all the little guys to agree on it. So there's not a strong arm into the situation. So let me pull something up that I just found thanks to like Eric Young and some of the guys on Twitter.
Eric Young is amazing. I had him on my show as well. And while you're looking for that, to your point, I just read that you have Sergey Lavrov come out and say that he emphasized that it'll be reopened, that this bridge technology will be open to non-member nations, potentially accelerating de-dollarization. Russia's financial messaging system is said as a model, secure, independent, and already functional. There's an opportunity to form payment platforms independent of external influence. Countries outside BRICS will have access when they're created. To your point, they're expanding this outside the BRICS ecosystem. So, yeah, your point is very valid, and I think maybe this is kind of the quietness before the storm as these countries are forming an alliance and not really giving the West as much information as they used to.
And they're getting less quiet. I mean, the gold price is the noise, right? Like Russia's SFPS, I think it's called, China's SIPS, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Brazil are all developing or have their own systems already, and they're all ISO. I think it's 20022, the standard. They have the same message format, so they all integrate directly into the digital currency bridge.
And that's really the key, is that they can all use their local currencies, their central bank local currencies, to transact with one another and then settle any differences, whether it be the unit or just settle in gold, is kind of what you're getting at.
Yeah. So, for example, the Bank of China came out and they acknowledged something called the Action Plan for Further Improving the Facilitation of Cross-Border Financial Services as an international financial center in Shanghai. And in this plan, they couch it as a plan, but effectively it's already done. One of the tasks is enhance the global resource allocation function and improvement or import financial platforms, prepare and build international financial asset trading platforms at a high level. Reading down, support the Shanghai Gold Exchange and other exchanges to carry out product authorization cooperation with overseas exchanges and expand the application of RMB benchmark prices in international mainstream markets. And here's the kicker: explore the internationalization of delivery of specific products of the Shanghai Gold Exchange and set up overseas delivery warehouses. So those overseas delivery warehouses already exist, are already co-located with formerly called, the platform formerly known as mBridge, the hubs in, say, the Dubai Free Trade Zone for the UAE with co-located gold vaults, the same in Saudi Arabia, the same in Russia, the same in Hong Kong, same in Shanghai, soon to come in Mumbai. And they're linking those vaults specifically for the purpose of physical settlement of imbalances. Nations will allow imbalances to build and store their gold in another nation to the extent that they need liquidity in that market. But if they want to withdraw their liquidity from that market, they need the ability to move it for sovereign purposes to a vault within their national borders. And that's what that's about.
And that's huge if you think about it, which is one of the reasons I admire the BRICS is that they do things in a very long game, methodical, plotted out fashion, which is kind of hard for the people in the West to deal with, because this period between the building of the infrastructure and realizing what it means is too slow for people to understand and think it's a nothing burger. They dismiss it and walk past it, yet you can see that the chessboard is lining up for them to be able to substantially challenge the West. And I appreciate your insight on that. It makes a lot of sense, really does. The other day, yesterday, which I found really, really interesting, or 2 days ago, President Trump says at 3:09 p.m. on Truth Social, the golden rule of negotiating and success: he who has the gold makes the rules. Thank you. Well, that was very interesting, and even more interesting when you realize the United States has now become a net importer of gold. Massive amount of gold has come in this country since November, north of 60 million ounces that we know of. In your mind, Matt, and I think you have a grip on this as good as anyone I've ever spoken to, and I appreciate your candor and your time today. Is it possible that the rise of BRICS and this commodity-backed trade has already forced the West and President Trump's hand which kind of seems that way, triggering a quiet race back to hard money. And in that case, are the Western stackers, who I've been talking to forever, actually making one of the smartest, most contrarian moves of this entire monetary reset?
Yes, it's a smart move to stack, is the short answer to the last part of that question. Is anyone forcing anyone else's hand? Yes. I'm not privy to the inner workings of the trade negotiations and tariffs and things like that. But a lot of what we see presented, even, what Trump says his goal is, may not actually be his desired end state, but a negotiating tactic, right? Art of the deal and all that stuff. Not to give too much credit or shade. It's how he approaches negotiations. I'm not sure that it's actually adversarial with China, the revaluation of gold. Sure, the Fed, the international banking system that is predominantly based in London and New York would love to preserve King Dollar and the fiat merry-go-round, but really it's the banking system's hand that's being forced more so than any particular populist movement or Trump in particular or something like that.
I like that you say that, Matt, because I wonder if it is adversarial. Maybe it's not. Maybe it has something to do with, what Judy Shelton says, that they're going to issue gold-backed treasuries. Do you think the United States is following suit? Do you think that gold is quietly being reintegrated into this monetary system, this new system?
I think it is.
Yeah, I like that short, sweet answer.
You saw the trial balloon go up. I can't remember what organization reported on it about a week ago, that, people close to Trump are starting to float the idea of 50 and 100-year government bonds in order to term out U.S. debt. They don't mention how buyers are going to be attracted to that debt or who's going to be forced to buy it or regulated into buying it, be it pension funds and banks, or internationally, will we attract buyers with a gold backing? That's left off, but it exactly lines up with the book you just held up.
Yeah, it sure does. In fact, Judy told me on my interview with her, Matt, she said that, and for those who don't know, Judy was his nominee to run the Federal Reserve in 2016. A lot of people think she'll take over for Powell, but she advocates for 50-year treasuries, redeemable in gold, stable coins issued off of them. But she said something very interesting to me. She said, President Trump told me that he will issue them July 4th, 2026, the 250th anniversary. Now, she said that on my interview. And, if you think about it, it's you reshore all the gold and then you slowly let the price rise. And I asked her, I said, Judy, gold is held in every account in the West, central bank balance sheet, on something called the gold revaluation account. Do you think they will revalue gold? And not in so many words, in a very roundabout way, she said, yes. What's your take on that? You think we'll see gold revaluation?
I think we're seeing it right now. The way that they're doing it is better than an overnight or over the weekend bank holiday revaluation, because, the bullion banks get to make money on the trade. They're probably making money in both directions on it. However, it's going to go up. And when people talk about, well, if he revalued the gold on the balance sheet, it would only produce, what is it, 800 billion into the Treasury General account. Well, you could do a lot with 800 billion as far as reducing long-term issuance and things like that. But that's at current prices. What is it going to be July 4th, 2026? In the last year, gold's gone up, 75%? And it's at an accelerating rate. So even if it goes up just 75% in the next year and some change before that date that Judy mentioned to you, say it goes up 100% because it's a little bit longer, then you're looking at $6,500 gold and, $1.75 trillion in the Treasury General account. And that's ignoring the fact that this is turning into a parabolic move. So anybody that sits back and tells you they think they know what the gold price is going to be a year plus from now is just clickbait. Pure and simple. It's going to be higher. I think it's a pretty safe bet. And I think a lot higher. So they're going to do a lot with that money that they can get out of it, as far as being able to control long-term interest rates and maintain effectively yield curve control with gold on the long end.
What do you make of guys like James Rickard? Well, before I say that, the U.S. used to be a 1-to-1 gold backing, and then somewhere along the way, there was a law passed backing it by 40%. The Swiss had their Swiss franc backed by 40%. The unit, according to Delma Rousseff, was 40% gold backing that they've agreed upon in principle. And James Rickard, citing a 40% gold backing, taking the gold that we supposedly have held on behalf of the Treasury, the 8,300 plus metric tons, and taking 40% of the money supply, dividing it into it. And the number I think he came up with was about 24,000 an ounce of gold, which would give the Treasury General account 6 trillion free and clear. And when you realize that gold was revalued right over my shoulder, Roosevelt did it. He revalued gold from 2067 to 35. Or you look at the way that Nixon did it in 71, when he closed the gold window. The next year, he revalued it from 35 to 38, and the next year from 38 to 42.22. Each time the dollar is devalued, which is something Trump talks about wanting. What do you make of guys like Rickards, who says, well, they won't just market to market, they'll mark it up much higher, in the context that who would this benefit directly? The central banks, the United States, for now being a net importer, China, Russia, Saudi Arabia, all these countries, India. Do you see it going beyond marking it to market? Could they revalue it towards the end at a much higher price to restock the Treasury General account with enough money to start paying down the debt and giving them wiggle room to do what Judy says, issue 50-year treasuries, redeemable in gold?
They certainly could. However, I don't think that's what they will do. If they want to revalue it higher, which I believe they do, then the move is to revalue it gradually over the next year and a couple months before that date. Instead of doing it suddenly, where you fracture derivative balance sheets and things like that. What will they actually do? I mean, again, I'm not an insider like that could tell you something of that nature. I think they are in the process of valuing it higher now. As far as James Rickards, I don't know him. I know his background a little bit, and I've heard some of his interviews and things like that. 24,000, yeah, they could do that between now and next July. But also consider the way Luke Roman and Lynn Alden and Lawrence Lepper, a few other people look at it as how much of that Treasury balance sheet is owed to foreigners. What can the U.S. government, to some extent, cancel intergovernmental debt and regulate banks and insurance companies into buying bonds to the extent that they don't have to address domestic held bond liabilities in the same way. So I think it's something like 6 to 8 trillion range or something like that that's held by foreigners.
8 trillion, you're right.
So if you look at that number and then use Jim's same math, then the number gets cut to about a quarter of that. So you're looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of $6,000 to $8,000 gold.
And it's interesting, too, to your point, where you have now the Chinese insurance industry dipping their toe into the gold market. I wonder if this could become a broader trend. You certainly have the mind to be an insider. I can tell you were, you were in intelligence in the military. I can see why your line of thinking is very sound. You look at both sides, but you're able to put things together. This is what initially attracted me to your discussion on the unit and mBridge. I thank you again for coming on. I'm going to ask you one last question, Matt. Looking at what you know and what you are able to extrapolate about the future, if you could leave people with one message about where the world is headed and what they should be doing right now to protect themselves, what would it be?
When we think about capital and preserving capital, growing capital, and what wealth is, we need to really be conscious of what social capital is. And loving your neighbor, building community, and all of the financial capital in the world will not lead to a happy and healthy life. So while we have, people have different financial constraints on the way that they can build financial capital, we all have very similar capabilities to build community around us, to invest in your neighbor, invest in your church and your community, and don't neglect building social capital, because at the end of the day, that's what really matters.
Yeah, man, amen to that. I appreciate that, and that's very true. All the money in the world doesn't buy happiness or health. I think that is a good thing to leave people with. Matt, how can more people follow what you're doing? And I think they should. What's the best way to stay on top of what you're doing?
Well, really, I'm just on Twitter. It's at EF Bullion is the handle. I have a Substack, but I haven't published there in well over a year. Again, I'm focused on my job for Kinesis right now to expand Kinesis's reach in the U.S. market, to bring products that appeal to the U.S. market, and to get people the cheapest bullion that we can get them while maintaining some profitability, right? Because as a company, we are firm believers in sound money, and we want that to reach the deepest market possible and work with great companies like Miles Franklin to do that.
I appreciate that very much. Yeah, I'm interested in exploring that further. As I mentioned, Andrew McGuire is a friend. I think I'm on his show this week. I had him on my show recently. I've been on his show several times. You couldn't be working with greater people. Rob Keynes, some of the best guys I've met in 35 years in this industry. I love Rob. I always say he's one of the smartest guys I've ever met. So congratulations to you, Matt. I think you're right up there with intelligence, and you seem like a very good guy. I hope to meet you in person here one of these days real soon, and pick up where we left off. I'll certainly have you back on the show as time unfolds. These are very interesting times, and a guy like you is the perfect person to help decipher it. Again, I thank you for coming in today, and wish you all the best, and look forward to picking up where we left off real soon.
Yeah. Thanks, Andy. God bless, buddy.
God bless, brother.
Little by Little with Andy Schechtman.